hard to nail things down exactly on these kind of things. So some of this is, as I teach, there's going to be examples I bring up, and some of these things are going to be pretty much generic in some ways and not specific. When you get the tests, there's going to be a bunch of questions, and I want you to pay attention to the wording on the questions. This is kind of some guidelines real quick here for this, because a lot of it's going to say things like, do you generally, or do you desire, and those kinds of things. For example, one of the questions will be, do you have the need to be on time? Will be one of the questions in one of the tests. And that doesn't mean that you're always on time. It doesn't mean that you're late. It just says, do you have the need to be on time? In other words, inside of you, do you get really frustrated if you're late? And so, you're dealing with somebody, you have a spouse or something, and they tend to be late all the time, and you get frustrated because you want to get there on time. There's a motivation behind that, why you have this need to be on time, and we're going to discover that, and that's part of what the testing is about. What the testing really is about, and maybe this is a good brief introduction for you. As Jeremy talked about this, he quoted the scripture that I'm going to talk about next week out of 1 Corinthians, when Paul wrote, and he says that it is good for us to earnestly desire the spiritual gifts. Okay? And that word earnest is to be zealous, to chase after, to grab after, to be, something that was just you can't get enough of. So I think it's saying we should be desirous of them. He also wrote in there, he says, I wish, brethren, that you would not be ignorant about the spiritual gifts. So I think that if he specifies that and somebody tells you not to be ignorant about something, that means it's probably a pretty important thing to pay attention to. And as I've taught this gifts course over the last dozen years or more, probably almost 20 years of this, I've taught this at Youth of the Mission Bases in Peru 4 or 5 times. And I've taught it at a lot of different churches, a lot of different small groups, big groups, those kind of things. And the reason that I think this is a very important thing to teach is that I think that we have a lot of misunderstanding about spiritual gifts. We kind of all know the term gifts, and we kind of think we know a lot about the gifts. But it takes me about a minute and a half to figure out if somebody really understands it when I start talking to them. Because they'll start talking and they'll start confusing the gifts. Well, I have the gift of prophecy, and so I'm going to be a prophet. Well, okay, wait a minute. Whoa. There's 2 different things in that you're talking about there. The office of a prophet, the gifting of prophecy, and a motivation of being a prophet. There are 3 different things. And so we can kind of confuse these up a lot. And what happens is that then because we misunderstand them, we misuse them. And how many have ever been the victim of the misuse of a spiritual gift? And every hand goes up pretty much, because that has happened. Someone who thinks that they are called to be a prophet because they love prophecy, and so then they step into some places in some authority that they shouldn't be stepping into, and because they confuse these things. And so I think the church needs to learn to understand it. The second part of that is that what I'm going to really be teaching, and what the thrust of this concept of it is the third part of the spiritual gifts. There's 3 parts to these. And we're going to talk about these next week. I'm going to really teach these out for you. So I promise you this is what will happen. You're all going to look at me like deer in the headlights for the first 3 or 4 hours of this. You're just not going to probably grasp a lot of this. But by the time we start talking about the gifts, and I start coming to the one that most is applicable to you, the light's going to go on really fast, and you're going to go, oh, now I get what you're trying to say. I promise that's what will happen, because that's the way it works every time I teach this. The first part is just like, but then it all starts to make sense after 3 or 4 hours. I hate to set you up that way, but that's really kind of what happens. There's 3 parts to the gifting. There are 3 gift categories. The first one is ministry spiritual gifts. I'm just touching on these. I'm going to teach on them next week. Ministry gifts, and those are the gifts to the church. They're leadership gifts: apostle, prophet, pastor, teacher, evangelist. It says that God gave these 5 gifts, and we call them the fivefold. It's a Christianese term that we use. How many know what Christianese is? Understand what Christianese is? I tell a story, and I probably tell it again this evening, because I probably forget. I used to ride the bus to college, and I would sit in the back of the bus, and these 3 or 4 guys that lived by me were computer nerds. Any computer nerds in here? And they would sit and they would talk, RAM and gigabytes and gigahertz and hertz, and they start talking about all this terminology, and they have their own language and their own lingo that they completely understood what they were saying to each other. And most of us didn't understand them. I didn't really know what they're talking about. Coding and lines and all this stuff.
I use the term techie, but
okay, techies. If you want to say nerds, I don't want to offend anybody. This is politically correct age.
It's funny.
We as Christians do exactly the same thing. We use terms, we use words, we use catchphrases that we think people understand, and they give us food over their head. Like, I know that you guys love evangelism, but if you talk to somebody who has really no knowledge with Christianity, you say, I need to invite Jesus in your heart, they have no idea what you're talking about. It means nothing to them. You go out to tell them, I've come to seek you because you're lost, and they go, I'm not lost, I know exactly where I've been superior. So they don't translate those things well, and so I think sometimes we need to break those things down. And one of the problems that we have is that we misuse these gifts that we've been given because we don't understand them, as I'm trying to say. The second gift, part of the gift, first one is the minister gifts. God gave the 5, we call it the fivefold. That's why I kind of got off on that subject. We use that term, fivefold minister gifts, and people go, I don't know what you're talking about. You like fold the napkin 5 times or what's the second one of them is called the manifestation gifts. Now this is what most people understand as the giftings, and most people use the terminology. I gotta pull mine up because I gotta make sure I got all. Again, I'm not going to teach on these very much today because it's really not the purpose. But I want to give you some thought process about this all. Okay, so there are 9 manifestation gifts. I'm going to throw these out really fast so I can make sure I get them all correct. Because I'm going to forget. Okay, excuse me for 1 second. Here we go. There are 9. There are 3 spoken, 3 power gifts, and 3 revelation gifts. And most of you probably know these, and you at least know some of them. Speaking in tongues. Have you ever heard of that one?
I do.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I do.
I always tell people, again, I'm going to probably repeat myself a bunch of times. I always tell people, if you're at a Christian party, and you're kind of bored, tell them, well, I think that speaking in tongues is the initial evidence of being baptized in the Holy Spirit. And you'll liven up the party just like that, because we're going to start talking about, whoa, wait a minute. No, that's the first one. We got 8 more to go, and we can't even get beyond that one. That's the church, right? I mean, no, seriously, we can't talk about it. So, speaking in tongues, the interpretation to the tongues, that's a separate gift, and prophecy. That's the next one to get you into trouble. I'm talking about prophecy. Then there are 3 power gifts, which are miracles, faith, and healing.
Yep.
Then there are 3 revelation gifts, which are words of wisdom, words of knowledge, and discernment. Okay? So that's the second category, which is the manifestation gifts. The last category, which is what we're going to really focus on the next bunch of hours together, are the 7 motivational gifts. Okay? And these gifts, just in case you're wanting to think about these a bit more ahead, these are found in Romans chapter 12, verses 6 through 8. So I threw out the scriptures there so you know that I'm not teaching heresy. There are 7 of these: prophecy, teaching, serving, organizing, exhorting, giving, and mercy. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a test that is going to try to discover one of those 7 motivational gifts inside of you. And the reason we're going to look at these is because everybody has this motivation to how they act and they react. We talked about just for a second about this need to be on time. For example, you can discover why it is that you get really irritated that your wife is always late. And part of that is because you have a need as part of your gift to be on time. And these will be, hopefully be revelatory. One of the stories with me is that I am a teacher motivation gift. And I'm also, I kind of run the line of teacher. That's kind of an office gift I have, but also it's kind of my motivation. So I like words, I like knowledge. Just like I was talking to Jeremy earlier, and I preached at Great Lakes last Sunday, and I was preaching on the subject of transition. I got to get my phone because I don't know. This is flabbergasting to me.
Yes, yeah.
But I'll say this, I like words. So I like to look up the words. When I teach, when I preach, everything of my motivation comes out of that idea of being a teacher. I want to teach you something. I want you to learn from me. I'm not necessarily here to exhort you to be a good, really good person. I don't want to sit here and counsel you and those kind of things. I want to teach you. And so my relationship to you is going to come from that idea of teaching. So I was looking up the words as I do, and so as I was going to teach on transition, I looked up transition in the dictionary, and then I decided, well, I'm gonna look up the word in the Urban Dictionary. I don't know if you ever heard of that. it's kind of a new dictionary that they're using in a lot of applications in schools and things like that. So this urban dictionary is kind of the trendy dictionary to use if you want to get a definition. I looked up the word transition in the urban dictionary, and anybody want to take a guess what you think this is going to say? Tell me. You're going to be shocked.
Let's hear at least one guess. Anybody got a guess?
I guarantee you're going to be shocked at its definition.
Transitioning.
Transitioning in the urban dictionary?
Yeah.
What it says in the urban dictionary?
What's your guess?
Gosh.
I'll tell you.
I got a guess. Imparting, or imparting what the teaching is trying to bring across.
Here we go.
Impartation.
You're not even close.
No.
Here's the term. It says transition. The term used to describe a transsexual's journey from appearing like their birth sex to their actual gender.
Oh my God.
Often includes HRT and surgery of some kind. And this is the bottom. It says transitioning can be very painful, but in the long run, it's worth it.
Wow.
So as a teacher, I just educated you as a teacher.
Yeah. Wow. Man.
What they're doing.
Oh my God.
Isn't that great? Anyway, I took a bunny trail there for a second. Sorry about that. So here's what we're going to do. Is I'm going to give you the test. This thing takes about 45 minutes. Probably maybe an hour, possibly, but mostly 45 minutes. What it consists of is something very simple. There is a series of pages. You're going to get 7 pages. You're going to get 7 pages, and each page has 20 questions on it. Okay?
Yay!
And what you're going to do is you're going to get an answer sheet that has numbers on the sheet that correlate with the page. I'm not going to tell you what the gift is, because I've done this before. I used to have the gifts written out, you know, prophet, teacher, and what happens is that it skews people, because people say, "Oh, I know, I'm an exhorter," and so then when they start writing out the exhorter, it kind of skews how you answer the questions a little bit. I found. So I'm going to keep you a little in the dark. You probably figure them out within the first 4 or 5 questions anyway, at least somewhat. But I want to try to keep you in the dark a little bit, so it's a little bit more zoned in on this. So what you do is you're going to answer with numerical answers, from 0 being never to 5 being all of the time. Okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to write, for example, you're going to read question number 1. Number 1 says, "Are you able to discern motives and the character of people and the way things really are?" Like, do you have discernment? That's going to be either 0, no, I never have discernment. 1, seldom do I have discernment. Sometimes, usually, mostly, or all the time I have discernment. Again, I want you to do 2 things. 1, don't overthink this. It's fairly vital and important, because if you sit there and you think, "Oh no, let me think about, last week I think I did that. Well, you know, when I was 12, I was in." You overthink it, you're gonna skew things. Put your kind of first reaction to it. Okay? And again, second thing is see the generalities of it. Again, question number 5 is, do you feel that you are an independent person? That doesn't necessarily mean you are independent, but do you feel like you're independent? Is that kind of your view of yourself? So those kind of things. We're going to go, I already know what Rose is. So from 0 to 5, I want you to answer that. And then when you're done, what's going to end up happening is you're going to have a column of numbers, 20 numbers, and you're going to add those up. And that's going to be a score that we're going to use to help decide what your spiritual gift is. Not decide, that's not a word, but determine and help you understand what your spiritual gift is. Then what we'll do is when we come back together next week, I'm going to give you the introduction on Friday night, and maybe start the first one Friday night. We'll see how time goes. And then the next consecutive set hours, we're going to go break down each gift one by one by one by one. And we're going to explain to you the characteristics of the gift, the positives and the good uses of these things, and also some negatives. Because most of us probably could recognize the gifts in everybody else by the negatives. Because we tend to misuse them in a lot of ways. And so what I'm hoping is that by the time you're all done, you'll be able to say, "Oh, okay, so now I know what Jeremy is. And I understand why Jeremy gets really frustrated with this, or why he is really excited about this, and why I don't get that way." And again, I tell you, this will all start to make sense several hours from now. But for now, it's kind of how this works out. So does that make sense? Everybody have any questions about the test part of this?
Oh, no.
I was gonna say also mention maybe what we're gonna do for the schedule on Friday and Saturday.
Right. Friday night, we're gonna start at
Yep, same time.
6 o'clock. If we do a little bit of worship again, then again, I'll do the introduction and stuff. And then Saturday morning, we're gonna start at 9, and we'll work down them. They take 45 minutes, maybe to an hour-ish, something like that. I'll try to be as quick as I can. I do this over at YWAM for like almost 20 hours of teaching on this. So I'm trying to condense this down pretty tight.
So Saturday we'll start again 9 o'clock sharp. Next Saturday.
Not this
We're gonna yep, and then we're gonna have our breakfast if you want at 8 o'clock. Then we'll have a light lunch in between to break it up, and then we'll just stay right here. We'll have a light lunch provided.
All right. So here's why this is important. Because if we learn to work together,
Yeah.
it makes us stronger.
Yep.
And what happens a lot of times is the church misuses the giftings in people because they misunderstand the gifting in people. They see people that are servants and they say, you know, you're really good at doing that, so we're going to put you in charge of this. And then they get in charge of it and they get really frustrated because they're not meant to be in charge of it, they're meant to be the servant of it. And then they get frustrated and there's this tension between the leaders and the person leading this, and then they end up leaving the church or something. You know, and we break this stuff down because we misunderstand why people do things. And so I'm truly trying to help you understand each other and the people around you. I did this for Teen Challenge, and at least from what they tell me, 2 months or 3 months later, these guys are still talking about this.
Yeah.
So they're starting to understand themselves a bit better. So here we go. You know, all this kind of stuff. And he'd come into the party and he saw this lady sitting over on the couch. And he makes a beeline for this lady sitting on the couch, and he sat and he counseled her the whole night while the party's going on. The party. And he's counseling her. I mean, you know, it's like this deep, really deep spiritual one-on-one counseling on the couch while we're trying to play, you know, party games. And I got really mad at him for doing that. Well, after we took this test, I find out that in his exhorter gifting, that's what motivates him is to do that. That does not motivate me. In a one-on-one situation, I am not motivated to like this thing to have to press into somebody and find out how to do it and all that kind of stuff. I'm a teacher gifting. I can be at a party, which my wife gets frustrated with. I can be at a party, and after a while, it's like, okay, I've had enough stimulation for a while. Into the office, flip on the office, you know, read USA Today for a little bit, and maybe make a couple notes, and you know, a couple worship songs to get for the list for next Sunday, you know, and that kind of stuff. And she'd come and find me in the office and go, "What are you doing? You know, we're entertaining people here." And I said, because that's my motivation. My motivation is as a teacher is to. The question was asked, do you get more enjoyment out of researching than presenting? Well, yeah, I love to research. I love to sit and pour through books and stuff like that. And so, you know, so he and I learned to work together on this. He began to understand that these are the situations that I come alive when I'm teaching in front of people. He comes alive in a situation of going over and working and counseling people and talking to them in depth and getting to know them personally. And so that's how we learn to not get mad at each other when we would see them doing these things. So that's why this was helpful to me personally.